This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.
I'm Tom Hoppy, and I'm your host of the Most Painful Podcast. On our last episode, we spoke to Helen LeSolaire and Anouk Beauvais about The Invisible No More, a gender-based analysis of women veteran issues. That was a report created by the House of Commons Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs. And it talks about the unique challenges faced by Canadian female veterans and their recommendations. That came out in June 2024, the report. And if you missed that podcast, you can listen to it on our Spotify and Apple feeds. So, what is cold water therapy? Can it help with conditions such as chronic pain or chronic inflammation, both which can have negative effects on our health? So there have been some studies on cold water therapy and how it can help our overall health. And to talk to us about this today, I'm joined by Andrew Thomas, former CF physiotherapist, and he's now a civilian physiotherapist working for the Canadian Forces. And he's used this, and he's studied the effects of cold water therapy. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tom. Happy to be here.
Great to have you on. So I know you've done this a couple times to our Alpine Challenge program with our vets who found it very useful. So maybe why don't we just start from the beginning, because some people may not even know what this is, and kind of just give an overview and we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, I mean, for me, and as we spoke before, I haven't gone hardcore deep into recent science, but I got a lot of it will be kind of me, just my own experience and just from just doing this stuff myself. But I guess I'll quickly just, I don't know if we even talked about this before, but my initial relationship with cold started, probably about 15 years ago, maybe on a New Year's Day. I did one of those polar bear dips. This is back when I was living in the East Coast of Nova Scotia. We went to, I believe it was Queensland Beach, just near Halifax. It was just a New Year's Eve. It was a New Year's Day polar plunge. There was, of course, they had firefighters and paramedics there. There's probably about, 50 or 60 people there. Me and a couple buddies decided to try it. And I just remember went in, I would have been in my early 20s at the time. We went in and did it. I got in the Atlantic Ocean on January 1st, and it was an initial incredible shock. I'd never been in that kind of cold before. I never felt that sort of cold before. And I felt like I could, having been I was just studying to be a physiotherapist at the time. So I had a little bit of knowledge of the cardiovascular system, but I felt like I could feel my whole cardiovascular system contract. I could felt like the arteries and the veins just wanted to get away from that cold stimulus in the skin. I felt everything kind of just get tighter. And then I tried to take a few swimming strokes, and I could after a minute or two, I have no idea what the temperature of the water was, but it was, winter in the Atlantic Ocean. I had to get out relatively quickly, but I guess what I noticed was that afterward, I felt, after I warmed up with a blanket and we did have a shot of whiskey, I just felt invigorated. And I don't think I slept that night. I was just so tuned up. I was like, wow, my nervous system just felt it was going out of whack. I didn't feel bad. I just felt very invigorated. And that was sort of really my only experience back then. And then fast forward to years later, basically during COVID, during the shutdown, when I was living on my own at the time, divorced, kind of in debt, and then laid off from my civilian job at the time, I literally got a text from a friend, and he said, "Hey, have you heard the Wim Hof method?" I'm like, "What is that?" So I did a bit of reading into it. So Wim Hof is a gentleman who has this method of overall health, and I'll let you all kind of do your own research on that. But I am looking at his book right in front of me here now. The Wim Hof method, Activate Your Full Human Potential, came out a couple of years ago. It does a great job of summing it up. But basically what it was as I looked into it, I think I just downloaded some little app, and it was a combination of doing breath holds, exposing yourself to cold water afterward. And there's other parts of it too. I didn't go into the full program, but for me, here I was laid off during the middle of the shutdown, where a lot of us kind of found ourselves with a whole lot of free time, especially if you weren't working. And so literally what I did every morning, trying to keep a routine, I would wake up early. I would do this breathing method, which consisted of sort of 30 seconds holding your breath for as long, or 3 times holding your breath as long as you can after 30 big deep breaths. And then, maybe a bit of meditation after, but then was just expose yourself to cold water. And the only cold water I had access to was a cold shower. And so I started, like as we all do, if you hop into a shower, that initial recoil, like, ooh, that's kind of unpleasant. So your nervous system says, well, what am I doing here? But I started very simply, maybe 15 seconds, and then after a regular shower. And then I was like, okay, this feels kind of good. Again, I wasn't feeling quite the same response I did many, many years ago in the Atlantic Ocean, because the water wouldn't have been anywhere near as cold. But as I started doing this as I had 8 weeks of being laid off, I would just progress it each day from an additional 15 seconds. Maybe it was every other day. I don't know all the details what I did, but eventually I was getting up to 3 to 4 to 5 minutes of just standing in the cold water. And there was that initial shock. And then after a bit of a varied amount of time, I would just focus on some deep breathing. Often I try to breathe through my nose to stay warm. It's something I do in yoga too, but I just started to kind of crave it. It just felt good. It was like, wow, do I even really need a morning cup of coffee after doing this? And of course I took one because I like coffee, but it was just one of those combinations of feeling so invigorated. And not to get too personal, but I mean, at the time I had gone through a really uncomfortable breakup, i.e. I had someone dump me on my 40th birthday, laid off from my job. Things weren't, I had a lot of, I guess, very superficial reasons to kind of maybe feel a little sorry for myself or be a little bit, things aren't ideal. But I think the biggest response I found in myself was like, I just felt great. And maybe it was a combination of doing something relatively uncomfortable in the morning, setting the stage for, oh, geez, that was a little success where, I could stay in a cold shower for 3 minutes and just feel great. And get over that initial bit of recoil, and then I'm just comfortable. And then I think the longest I did it was maybe 12 minutes just for fun, but that's just not that feasible. Yeah. But anyway, I just felt this overall feeling of just well-being, despite at that time life not being overly ideal. And then and that's sort of how I went with it. I just and since then, so since winter of 2020. Pretty much when I get a shower, I end off with a range between 15 to 30 to 2 minutes, 30 seconds to 2 minutes, depending on timing, depending how late I'm running or not running in the morning. I just find it's one of those things I crave it as much, if not more than a cup of coffee. Yeah. And then, so I mean, that's kind of like, I kind of going how it sort of affected me. And then I just feel for myself, it fosters a level of starting something that makes you think, geez, I have a bit of more resilience than your average person, or I just have more resilience than I once did at the beginning of each day. And that sort of sets the stage for, I think, a lot of little mini successes. Just like that principle when you say, oh, geez, make your bed when you first wake up, because that sets the stage for productivity and, each day.
Like you're talking, the breath work and that is all kind of part of this. It's not just about jumping into a cold shower. No. And I think Wim Hof talks about that.
Of course.
And I mean, we also have a podcast on breath work with Abby Manu-Suits for people who want to learn a little more about that. But yeah, I mean, we've talked in the past too. I mean, there is science behind this too, right?
100% there is.
Yeah. So maybe you can kind of talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, I guess for me, I guess one thing I could do is we could send a link to that presentation I did with the Alpine Challenge group, but and I haven't, as we've talked. I mean, there's always more and more science out there, but there's like legit science saying that this can help with overall health. There is known and documented scientific evidence that it does have a positive effect on the immune system. There's a very scientific principle called hormetic stress, and that's the principle of a little bit of something that's stressful or potentially damaging, if done in smaller amounts, can actually stimulate adaptation and increased in tolerance to that same stimulus. The whole idea is, I guess, the principle between allergy training, that kind of stuff, slight exposure to something that's uncomfortable or toxic in small doses can start to foster an increased tolerance to that very same, bad stimulus, so to speak.
That study there, like you said, is not necessarily about cold water therapy, but it's talking about the stress on the system doing something different, which is cold water therapy. So there is some evidence to that. Oh, yeah. Has there been, have they, I mean, even in my own community here, I'm hearing people, because we live close to the ocean, people are jumping in and saying, oh, I'm doing this cold water therapy and all this kind of thing. So is there, other than that one you're talking about, but is there studies ongoing, or have there been studies? Wim Hof, I mean, he's got his book. Is he referring to any studies out of that to support some of this?
He himself, they've done some stringent testing, with his method in science, relevant to, I don't know if it's been done specifically on chronic pain, Tom. I know if in that specific book, there is, people who've had chronic pain that talk about the benefits of the program. They're not just saying it's only cold showers. I think they're talking about the combination of the breathing, the overall general health. I mean, as a physiotherapist, obviously I have to say I can't give medical advice beyond what, you have to get clearance from your doctor, so on. But I mean, the combination of just healthy living and this exposure to cold is shown to increase something he talks about something that's been scientifically shown, that cold exposure can increase something in your body called brown fat, which is a type of fat cell that actually increases and has thermogenic properties. So if any of you look and see who Wim Hof was, he's quite a slim guy, but this is a guy who'll sit in cold, icy water for, world record times. I don't know what the kind of times he's in, but he has a higher level of this brown fat, which is a higher thermogenic ability to generate heat in the body than the typical white fat cells. And from what the science is saying, exposure to cold can start to stimulate that increase in brown fat. And again, what I like about his method is that he's not just trying to be a prophet saying, do this, do this, do this. And again, I can't cite specific studies because I don't have access to them. But I mean, I know that he wants this method to be scientifically tested. I think in the presentation I did with the Alpine Challenge, there was a study, I believe it was 2015, where they measured regular cold showering of, I think, between 30 seconds to 60 seconds over time. They saw actual changes and improvements in that group's quality of life perception. I think there was actually less lost time at work. I don't think they were looking specifically at chronic pain, but chronic pain being a very, very much a linked neurological condition, the theory of conditioning the body to manage cold, certainly I would say it has spillover into potential for maybe breaking that pain cycle. What do you do when something's hot and inflamed? We still put ice on it. Interestingly enough, there's been lots of studies done that I can never keep up on it. Sometimes they say put ice on it. Now they say they don't. It's kind of there's always something. But I know for a fact that post-operatively, and for example, my mother's getting a knee replacement in a month. And I know in a lot of post-operative people, cold can help with that initial big kick of inflammation, which can in turn help improve overall range of motion, so it's one of those things. And of course, too, we talk about how cold baths and the whole Nordic spa idea has been around for thousands of years. So before science was science and done, with the randomized controlled trials and all this other scientific method, cold therapy has been done by humans for many, 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 many years before it was ever thought to be rigidly studied. And again, because I don't have access to a university database, you can only, when you do a quick search on Google Scholar, that's what a lot of people only have access to, you'll get the odd, study talking about that, the one I cited about the increase in quality of life, and you'll get, then of course, the tricky part is you'll get countless websites and other information that will just go on and on about the benefits of cold therapy, but they're not always 100% linked to scientific, this is what the data says. But as we've talked as well, on the Huberman Labs podcast, he does do a much deeper dive into the hardcore science. And this is a 3-hour podcast that I remember I listened to in sections, because not everyone has time just to plunk down and listen to 3 hours of, he does a fantastic job of just sifting through and getting, real life kind of application. And I'm not going to say I know all the, from what the book I'm looking at right now in the quote Wim Hof method, it says, why not start 15 seconds at the end of a regular shower? Do that, every second time you shower in 1 week. Next week, you do maybe 25 or 30. So it's one of those things where you're just slowly building up a little bit of that and pushing that hermetic stress principle, a little bit of something that's uncomfortable or potentially damage the tissue, increase the tolerance. So, I mean, I think that's where the science, I think, falls, and I don't know. And again, having done, and many times when every time I do this lecture for you guys, I've done it the last 3 years, I pop on Google and say, what's the current research on chronic pain and cold exposure? I can't find anything. I couldn't find, with my limited resource of just Google Scholar, what is going on. I think that would be something that we could do. It would be an interesting deep dive into find what other science is out there.
And I mean, you work every day with people, and like you said, you've been doing this job as a physiotherapist for many years.
Yeah.
So you're working with injury, chronic pain,
Yeah.
you're using ice, you're using heat.
Mhm.
And, we can even look at the research on saunas alone, the benefits
Totally.
of sauna on metabolic health
Yeah.
and inflammation and cardiac health.
Yeah.
So yeah. And Huberman, I was going to mention that too, because I did listen to part of that podcast. It is a long podcast,
It's a
but he
long
does
one.
get it. He gets into the nitty gritty, which is,
Yeah.
if somebody has the time, then that is worth listening to. But I mean, you've also worked with patients, so you're seeing, yes, science is important. I'm not
100%.
discounting that,
No.
but you're also working with patients, so you're obviously seeing the when they're doing this, you're probably seeing the effects of it. So
yeah, and like the odd time, again, a lot of physios aren't saying. I'm not saying to all my physio patients, "Hey, go take a cold shower," But I mean, with the truth is, chronic pain is something that's increasing in its frequency in our condition, or in our population. Sorry about that. And it's one of those things. What is pain? Pain is a neurological chemical signal. And so what is the perception of heat and cold and touch? Also a neurological chemical signal. So, I mean, if playing around with what's more dominant, that can disrupt the pain. Pain typically is a bit of a slower chugging signal. It's the principle I often will explain to patients that, what do you do if you're walking through your apartment and you bump your knee on a coffee table? The first thing you do is you touch it and you rub it because that hurts. Because what you're doing there is you're literally just disrupting that slow chugging pain signal to your brain and making the touch of you rubbing that leg or that knee that becomes the more dominant signal. So, it's one of those things that I think, replacing maybe a pain signal with a little bit of cold and maybe an increasing and having that little game. A lot of us like to have metrics where we say, well, geez, last week I did a 15-second cold shower and this week I can do 30 and it's easier. That's a little success. So, I mean, maybe it's neurologically disrupting some pain, but it's also giving you that little win, and as we know that, when someone's in chronic pain, we got higher stress levels. We got typically that it's kind of not as much emotional satisfaction in life. So if you can vet that or play around with those signals, I think there's options and opportunity for someone who wants to do it. Now, some people don't like cold, and that's totally okay. Maybe even that Huron podcast, he talks about heat exposure at the same time, I think.
Yeah, and as we know, pain is not just about physical; it's the biopsychosocial. So, like you said, it's the cold showers, but it's also all the other things that go with it. The breath work, which helps calm the vagus nerve, which helps calm the system down, takes out of fight for flight. So to me, it sounds like it's a combination of things. But you're right. Huberman does. I cut you off there, but he does cite. I'll let you go run with that one. But he does cite research that they did on.
Totally. I do remember one thing they talked about was that some of the best ways to cool off the human body is not if you're super hot, you want to put a cold towel on your forehead or the back of your neck. But I remember one study they talked about was actually that the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet actually respond to cold and help cool the body down more effectively. And I remember them citing the study. Don't know where it was done. I don't know the how many subjects they were and so on. But I remember the study being something like they took healthy college students and they had them to do, I think it was like how many chin-ups or pull-ups can you do? And then they would soak their hands in cold water, icy water for X amount of time, and they would have them kick at the can. And there was this trend where after exposing only the hands to cold, that they got more pull-ups. And I guess the theory and what they were talking about was that, and I don't want to, I think the term was a globular tissue that, anyway, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but it just cooled the body down that much more effectively. And that was what they were saying, that perhaps the cooling of the hands had a larger effect on cooling the body and allowed the muscle tissue to recover, so they got more pull-ups. I mean, and that's about as detailed as I can. I just thought that's kind of interesting. So did I try it? Yeah, 100%. Did I notice a difference? I can't remember. I don't think so. But I mean, I was also gassed.
Even if you look 10 years ago, maybe a little more, and you look at firefighters for rehab and fire, it turned to cooling chairs for the forearms.
So, yeah, right.
Right. So it wasn't about pouring water on your neck or over your head, like we see. Yeah. It actually, the science showed that you dip your forearms into cool. So, yeah, it makes sense. I mean, and that helps cool the body down more effectively.
I think I like what you said too, Tom. Like, me being a clinician, is that any clinician, I think you walk that line between, yes, you have to do the hardcore science because you would want to do evidence-based practice. We want to give patients the best science, but there's also that personal component too. So I think any medical person would agree to some degree that we walk this line between science and art, and art or holistic approach too. That I think if you're only saying one is good, that can be dangerous because, as we've talked before, we're attracted to one path, but I think that's the thing is like, there's many other ways to think of it. I mean, I could tell a patient, hey, look, you know what? Science says if you do this 15-second cold shower, you're going to feel better. You might have less pain, but like, well, I don't do that. I don't want to do that. So if they don't want to do it, it doesn't matter what the science says. It probably won't work for them, and if that's where you have to have that little bit of extra, the personal, that's why you have to be open to that too.
I think it's just like you said, you got to be able to walk the talk, right? And,
Yeah, totally.
how else can you advise someone? Like you said, you started this years ago.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen the benefits it provided to you, and then
Yeah.
did your research and started using it with patients, and now you're seeing it affecting other people. So that, to me, that as a, if I was a patient, I would appreciate that someone's already done it themselves.
I believe that's strong. Like, I mean, you can't, how do you get street cred if you're not doing it? And I think that's one of those things that comes back to, I think that's a theme that's in the Army, in the military too, even though I only have had a short career in the military. One of my favorite moments of my being a physio officer was once I would always do lunchtime workouts because I was too busy to get PT time. Honestly, it was a crazy busy job at the time. And so I remember I was up at CFB Edmonton. I was up in this little mezzanine area doing a workout, and this guy had come to me. I had as a patient, and like he just said to me, he's like, "Hey, you know what? We really appreciate seeing you coming out here and kicking your own ass because we're doing the same thing." And I think it's one of those things, like, I mean, that gives you street cred. And if you are, it's important, like you said, to talk the talk and walk the walk. And I'm not saying that everyone has to do cold showers, but I mean, if you're going to ask someone to do something, you better have done it yourself, or at least, and maybe it isn't right for you.
Well, and I think you just kind of finish this off. You hit the nail on the head. You look at places like Scandinavia Spa in Whistler and up in Quebec, and that. What are we doing? We're going from heat to very cold, or into cold, and they're and they've shown that to work for many years. So I'm sure there's more science to come out on this, and really, of course, like you said, everybody should check with their own clinician or doctor before they venture off on this path. But yeah, it may be helpful. So, Andrew, I appreciate the time on the show.
Hey, no problem. Hopefully it was helpful. And I guess if I can say one last thing, I think the truth is, if nothing else, this might be another little tool in someone's toolbox to help maybe improve overall health, mitigate some discomfort, mitigate some pain, just feel better. And it may not be right for you, and that's okay too. It's like, in a toolbox, maybe I like this hammer more than this hammer, but it's another option, I think, is the biggest thing. Yeah,
and you got, like you said, there's books out there, the him, and then you got Huberman, so people can listen and do their own research. So I appreciate.
I think it's important, totally.
Well, thanks for being on the show, Andrew.
Hey man, thanks a lot. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
And on our next show, we'll be talking about a program to help veterans who do not have access to family doctors. That one I think will be good, and maybe not just for veterans, but for anybody. It's a big issue in our country about having family doctors, so you can listen to that one. For feedback about the show or more information on chronic pain, you can visit our website, veteranschronicpain.ca, or follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Chronic Pain COE, and on Instagram at Chronic Pain _COE. To the audience, stay safe and keep the hope alive.
The Most Painful Podcast
is produced for the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence by Story Studio Network.